Hey guys, thanks for joining us. As Jalen just alluded to right before that short little break, why the Adaptation Advantage was a perfect book for today. We had to adapt
Whew,
somewhat on the fly, so happens.
on the
People's
fly.
schedules change sometimes, and you just got to go with it. So we adapted accordingly, and wanted to introduce this one. Super interesting to me. Um, I'm I like to pride myself on being a lifelong learner, learning new things, getting outside of my tunnel vision of whatever space I'm currently in. I think it's, in my opinion, important to see just a broader perspective. Um, so, with that being said, the adaptation advantage. I'm just going to read directly from the back of this book because I so often it summarizes things better than you can. So, real
It's
quick,
like they designed it to be that or
I
something.
know. Wow. So the authors of this book, first, success in the future of work centers on our ability to learn, unlearn, and adapt. Second, to succeed, we need to let go of the way we've always done it, and more importantly, our professional identities. And third, last but not least, leaders must get comfortable with failure, not knowing, ambiguity, and vulnerability to create the requisite psychological safety to lead our teams. So, in their opinion, it really comes down to those three things. Wanted to real quick jump straight into the second one, which is to let go, most importantly, let
Mhm.
go of our professional identities. They
Yep.
had a little quote that stuck with me in there. It said, more people have a harder time moving on from a job they've had for 20, 30 years. They have a harder time dealing with that once they have made that separation than losing a loved one. I think that's a
Ooh.
really interesting concept and idea. Jalen.
Yeah, and it almost makes sense. I mean, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, you're doing some at a minimum 8 hours, right? You're doing something that gives you a living. So it's something that you've almost come to rely on. It is something that you've relied on is that particular job. Not necessarily the skills that you've gained from that job, but how that job asks you to apply your skills. Is what you've relied on to basically thrive and exist. Um, and so that's something really hard to let go of for most people, especially if you like doing it. It's the whole if you enjoy what you're doing, you never have to work a day in your life. And so that's something that I can definitely see being big a big loss for people is if they have to let something like that go.
Yeah.
Um, so on that note, is there something that they believe that the authors believe can be done in order for us to have that better separation between an individual and their work?
Yeah, I think you actually mentioned it last week on the podcast with your plan words. Do you remember what I'm alluding to?
Not at all.
You allude to you are Jalen who does lending or works in the
Uh,
lending space. You're
yeah,
not a lender who is, it's not something that defines you,
yeah,
right? And I think that's ultimately what they definitely get at is wrapping your identity with what you do, and that's all you can do.
yep,
And I know I brought this up on a prior podcast of professional athletes that a
yeah,
lot of them have a really difficult time of integrating themselves within society because they've always identified with waking up at however early in the morning. They have that routine, they go through it, and that's it year after year after year. They've high school, right? But college then ramps up, and then professional, it's a way of life.
yeah.
And it becomes difficult to separate yourself from that, understandably. But it's of course
It
not just
definitely
that.
does.
Yep.
And you see them usually they're now they apply those skills that will it's usually like one of two ways that you see on the news at least or that are the most noteworthy ones. There's I'm sure plenty of athletes that go into regular everyday jobs that everyone but that's not really a story anyone wants to tell. I was a professional athlete and then I went to you know checking out groceries at the local Kroger and not that there's anything wrong with that, but before that, you got to admit, being a professional athlete was a lot more impressive of a career than checking groceries. So, but you see people like Magic Johnson, John Elway, Patrick Waugh. I'm just thinking of the Colorado sports market because that's one I deal with every day. But
Magic
they
Johnson is not Colorado.
He's actually he's actually thinking about he's one of the people in one of the buyer groups for the Denver Broncos. So
Oh,
he could
okay, okay,
he could
okay,
be.
okay.
Um, but yeah, so you see these like big executives that, and they were those athletes, and they only know that one gear, and so they're like, "Oh, I'm just gonna do that." In Colorado too, I can name quite a few realtors that were professional athletes, like played for the Denver Broncos, and you're like, "Wow, you were a professional athlete, and you now just want that kind of competition, or you want that more." You want to go into a job that can benefit that you can thrive in by using what you've already learned with that routine and constantly building yourself up mentally now, not necessarily physically, but building those skill sets out there. So, Nick, when I say all these sports athletes going into executive positions, anyone that comes to mind for you that are ex-athlete now?
Michael Jordan.
I my Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
I
So
guess he
he owns the
has.
Bobcats, right?
Oh, I
And
didn't know
so,
that.
but he also has gone in the liquor space. He's gone into
Yeah.
obviously his shoe line, his clothing line. That's
He
now
has shoes?
what's his name again? Um, no, and then obviously his clothing line of college athletics, right? You see his brand on University of Michigan football,
Yeah.
and it's not just a basketball thing, right? People want to wear Jordan.
Yep.
He's dipped into the soccer space with his logo and
Huh.
his brand. So yeah, he's the first one just because he was one of my biggest idols growing up. But with that
Yep.
being said, I think coming back to this adaptation advantage, another interesting concept that stuck with me, and I actually touched on it with Think Again with Adam Grant, was that just last
Okay.
week,
Yep.
or the week before, and it
Sometime.
yeah, sometime recently, and they reference the necessity to unlearn, right?
Yeah.
Because again, when you are in a workspace for however long, sometimes when you make a shift, you have to unlearn some of the habits you created to then relearn new ones. And with that
Oh, yeah.
ability, that self awareness to not just be so adamant on who's right or wrong, but the willingness to let go of something to get something in return. Because again, it's
Yep.
the adaptation advantage is all about, has nothing to do with keeping up with the Joneses. It has everything to do with allowing yourself to flourish in a world that is dominated by technology, but it's not only
100%.
dominated by technology. Yes, I
Yeah.
need to be able to work within the social media platforms and be aware of them if I want to be relevant in today's
Yep.
society and in workspaces. But they also dig into the importance of having human skills. There are some intangibles that us as humans have that technology will never be able to have. So you have the ones more affected by technology are the mundane tasks that
Yeah.
not a lot of people do want to do. And it's not to say it's okay,
Yeah.
but the reality is they are becoming and will be replaceable, right? The ones that require
Definitely will.
relationships and a skill set for me to understand where you're coming from as a person. Like
Yep.
there's certain pieces that the machine, at least this day and age, is not capable of knowing how you feel about something. It's not capable
Yeah.
of knowing what will happen. They're really good at telling you what did happen,
Yep.
and tracking things. So
Yeah.
they dig into the school system a little bit and say, is it a detriment for so many schools to revolve around STEM teaching, right? The
Right.
science, technology, what something in math. What's oh my god, shows you my knowledge of our school system. Um, nonetheless, they talk about it
Huh.
and say, is it a drop more of a drawback that our focus is on these
It's just
select categories, um,
engineering. That was the
engineering.
E that we are
Wow.
missing.
I'm obviously not an engineer, people. Sorry for all you engineers that skipped for your
I don't think
STEM
that is
courses.
that is no news to anyone that neither you nor I are engineers. That
Yeah,
is
yeah.
we-
But nonetheless, they come up with not the argument, but a point of view to say, are we sacrificing human skills to humanities? The Some of the elective courses that we seem to have gotten rid of that allow
yeah.
kids to just immerse themselves within the social worlds.
Oh yeah.
When you need that at being an adult. still,
Yep. Definitely do. You need to know how to talk to people. You need
right?
to know how to, so like a debate team or a speech class or just something like that. Those are the types of things that, you almost have to unlearn, probably to kind of to their point, you have to unlearn things as you become an adult because the way that you're taught in school, you have to follow this exact regiment. You have to be able to regurgitate things. It's like the real world doesn't ask you to regurgitate things that often. It
Right.
asks you to interpret. So
And critically think
being able
about,
to,
yeah,
yeah, and so that adaptation part is crucial because you have to be able to continually adapt to the new information that you're receiving. And if you're not good at doing that and then applying that adaptation and that new information and filtering through the noise and coming out of it with something that's actually useful, then you're as an adult, that's when you're considered you're not successful. You're not a good worker. You're limited in your functions. You're basically a meat sack of a person that can do a mundane task, and those mundane tasks are generally the ones that we hear constantly about being replaced by technology at some point because it's like I don't need a person to do this. Like maybe back in the day I did, but not anymore.
right.
And so yeah, I love that continue to focus on that adaptation part. Don't just as soon as you stop moving, you just die, man.
Yeah.
It's like,
And here's another interesting kind of play on words that I feel some people feel are interchangeable, but they talk about the difference between being flexible and the
Mm,
ability to be adaptable. Being
yeah,
flexible is shifting from one skill to another skill. Being
yeah,
adaptable is learning a brand new skill. And I think that was an
yeah,
interesting distinction between the two because I've heard other people talk about them like they're the same. Um, I don't know. Interesting viewpoint.
yeah. Well, I think I'm gonna leave it off with my last useful piece of information from a story from the last mortgage company that I worked at. There was a lady there, awesome lady. She was in copier sales for 10 years. Copier sales and mortgages. As a mortgage person, you're technically a salesperson. And definitely feels like that sometimes. But selling copiers versus mortgages is apparently the copier game is like a cutthroat game. I did not know that, but everyone's constantly trying to get people to cancel out of contracts and come in and swoop in and cancel your contract. And yeah, so she could have just applied what she knew from the copier game to mortgage world and that might have sufficed. Probably wouldn't be very effective. But she became a really good lender because she was able to very quickly adapt to being a loan officer. And so, yes, she understood there was some overlays there between the two jobs, or previous and current. But what she was really good at is finding what worked, find the areas that she knew she would need to learn about in the new game, and then apply those really well. So she was really good at adapting to the new job, not just good at flexing to a new sales position. So even those two sentences sound way better if you're like, yeah, I flexed to a new sales position versus I adapted to become a great mortgage lender. You're like, oh yeah, that second one, that second guy, that guy sounds like he has it a lot more. In whatever, I'm losing my words. He has he I trust him. I trust that second guy
Yeah.
more than the first one. So
Yeah.
oh oh gosh, I'm so tired today. I'm gonna edit that out. Goodness. Oh, all right, Nick. So after my ravishing story, um, what do you got going on this next week? What do you got going on this weekend, Nick?
Got another open house.
All
Saturday,
right.
Sunday. Got open houses.
Uh,
Got lives to try and change for the better. So we'll see.
yeah, definitely. It's yeah, you're selling a house, but you're also selling a lifestyle,
Yep.
and that's a lot cooler to put it that second way than
And very much a
to
reality
sell
though.
lifestyles. Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I think people forget that. It's not just a financial investment. More importantly, it's a lifestyle investment. Um, so
definitely is.
yep.
Perfect. Well, I have nothing going on this weekend, so I'm going to catch up on some sleep. That's what you should do on the weekends. That's why they were there. So, Nick, I'll tell everyone to have a wonderful weekend. Thank you again for listening to another episode of Beyond Real Estate. We hope that you enjoy listening to them or watching them as much as Nick and I enjoy doing them. That was weird. And if you we always promise ourselves we're just going to do one more week at a time, and we're going to stop as soon as we get bored of it. So we're here again. We'll be here next week. Nick, your word salad as always, my friend.
Guys, thank you for listening wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and we'll catch you next week.